I've played a lot of movement shooters. They engage a certain part of my brain that no other genre can. And the best part is, we're currently in a golden age for movement shooters. Well, at least outside of the AAA space. Recently, there's a subgenre that's been sprouting up, and it scratches the same itch as the games that inspired them. What if we removed the shooter from movement shooter, and replace it with something a little more personal? Now your melee attack isn't reserved as a panic button for when the enemy gets too close. This is your primary way of interacting with the game's combat. Movement slashers, as they're starting to become known as, typically take the same skills required to play a movement shooter, but crank up the reliance on good movement and positioning to 11, since you no longer have a gun to take long-distance firefights. The two games that come to my mind for this subgenre of movement shooter are Ghost Runner and Blood Thief, the latter being something I'm going to be borrowing heavily from. Love you, Blargus. I'd say Ghost Runner was my first experience with a movement slasher. You're fast, you have several abilities to make you even faster, and of course, your bones are made of glass. Wait, what? This is where the game's difficulty comes into play. You are a glass cannon. Most enemies can be defeated with a single hit, but so can you. And these guys have belt-fed automatic machine guns while you have a pointy stick. I'm not saying I don't like this style of difficulty, far from it. I've put plenty of hours into the Hotline Miami franchise, and that's like the game's whole identity at this point. What I am saying is this kind of brutality towards the player doesn't feel right to me in a first-person game. It takes a special kind of sadist to sit there and almost literally bash your head into a brick wall until you can finally break through it. That's where the second game on my long list of 2 games comes into play. Blood Thief. In this game you have a blood meter that acts as your health and as a currency you can choose to spend for stronger attacks and special moves. Taking a hit doesn't mean instant death, but it does take a sizable chunk out of the blood meter. You only die if a hit sends that meter below 0. And this is where I think Blood Thief shines when it comes to combat design for movement slashers. Making this meter your health pool and what is functionally a stamina bar just feels right. So I'm going to shamelessly steal it. I set out with the goal to make my own movement slasher prototype. I call it Project Bloodlust, and it's available for free on itch if you want to check it out yourself. Creating Project Bloodlust was an adventure in its own right, since I gave myself time restraints akin to a game jam for both the prototype and this video. I'm trying to increase my speed and efficiency at game development while also documenting it here on YouTube. So if that sounds interesting, consider subscribing. My plan is to release monthly videos related to game development. The first thing I did when developing this game was to set a foundation for the movement. I needed something that could give me all my favorite movement abilities but be flexible enough to adjust everything on the fly. Enter components. In Unreal Engine, components are plug-and-play bits of code that can be slotted into anything. For example, I made a component to handle everything related to jumping. Here's all the exposed variables that I can toy with. I can change how strong your jump is, how many times you're allowed to jump in the air, if at all, and whether or not coyote time is enabled. I also made components for dashing, sliding on walls, attacking, crouching, and crouch sliding. All of these are built in a way to be reusable, so the next time I make a game I won't have to recreate any of this. I can just port the components over and adjust all the variables to fit that style of game. To give you an idea on what an adjustment would look like, I initially had it so if you got close to a wall you would slow down. Ideally this was so you could readjust yourself and jump off the wall to a new location. But after designing some levels I found out this feature felt clunky and gets in the way of this particular style of game. So the slowdown was removed entirely, but you can still jump off the wall, keeping all your speed. And once I realized I needed to make that adjustment in the first place, the change only took me 10 seconds. Now, I have a lot of experience making different styles of movement for first-person games, so I was able to knock all of this out pretty quickly regardless. The thing I do need practice with is designing combat and the systems that would go with it. But before I can do any work on the combat, there was something important that needed to happen first. This is a movement slasher after all. It's pretty obvious what the weapon the player is going to wield. I needed to make a sword. So I got to work in Blender and came up with this guy. He's nothing fancy, but he gets the job done. Next, we need a hand to hold the sword. It'd look strange if the sword was just hovering in air, angrily slashing around like it's possessed. I didn't want to have to spend a long time modeling the hand, so I had to get creative, and recreated an older character of mine in Blender. I call her Emmy, and you'll likely be seeing her in future projects. What if I just... There! Thank you, Emmy, for giving us a hand. Now that the weapon and animations are in place, we need something to swing at. In the spirit of recycling, I'm reusing some old enemy designs from a project that's currently on hiatus, Second Essence. A first-person shooter where you never reload your gun. You just throw it at the first sorry sap you see and then pick up another one. I plan on getting back to this game in the future when I'm more confident in my abilities as a game developer. In the meantime though, the masked enemies I made for this game get a second chance at life. Now we can start developing the combat systems proper. I knew from the start that I was going to be borrowing the blood meter from Blood Thief, so it was just a matter of how I wanted to add my own flair to this design. Using movement abilities such as double jumping and dashing consumes blood, which can be replenished by standing in pools of blood, collecting blood vials, or by killing enemies. I had this idea where if you don't have any blood left, your sword breaks, and you can no longer swing it or use any movement abilities whatsoever. What you can do is throw the broken sword like it's a boomerang. If it kills an enemy while being thrown, it will return completely fixed, and your blood meter will be partially refilled. This turned out to be really fun, but it felt like something was missing when the sword wasn't broken. You should be able to throw the sword if you're perfectly healthy, but I didn't want it to act like the boomerang sword. So now, if you have blood and you throw the sword, it will impale itself on whatever surface it hits. You can then expend some blood to lunge to the sword's location, kinda like the air dash ability in Blood Thief, but not limited to only enemies. Speaking of, there's 4 different types of enemies in my game. 2 of them are melee focused, and 2 of them are projectile focused. The melee ones are pretty straightforward, they're just going to run at you and punch you. But I wanted to add some counterplay to the projectile enemies. So, in true Ultra Kill fashion, I made it so your normal attack can parry their bullets. The normal melee enemy will simply run up and attack you. The elite version of that enemy moves faster and attacks faster. The normal projectile enemy fires a predictable 3-round burst in your direction, while the elite projectile enemy fires multiple 3-round bursts in an unpredictable volley of shots, covering the arena in bullets you have to weave through or parry. With combat out of the way, we can now talk about level design. I spent a lot of time tweaking the enemy AI to work within the context of these closed-off arenas, but I didn't get too far with the idea because I couldn't make the enemies feel fun to fight. Thankfully, I had an idea. What if instead of forcing the player to fight in arenas, the levels are designed as linear paths that focus on making the player use their movement abilities, and the enemies are used as a way to add additional challenge on top of that. An example being a long hallway with a kill floor on either side, melee units running towards you, and projectile units firing at you from the other end. This one little change in how I perceived level design immediately made the game feel so much more fun. That's not to say I strayed away from having a big closed-off arena. The final level is exactly that. One big combat arena where you have to clear 8 waves of enemies that get increasingly more difficult. I'll be the first to admit that the enemy AI isn't that smart. So unless they are a melee unit, they won't seek you out directly, which means they'll just wander around until they get line of sight. What this means in practice is you'd spend a long time hunting for the last enemy, which got really frustrating. I made a quick fix by adding a red beam above their heads when you're in this level, so you'll always know where all the enemies are at. It's not ideal, but it gets the job done. In the future, for a full game, I'd design the enemies in such a way where this wouldn't be necessary, but for the time being, it works. And that's Project Bloodlust, my attempt at making a movement slasher. A condensed 4-level experience with advanced movement tech and fast combat. You can play it for free on itch, and let me know what you think in the comments below. If all goes well, my next video will be about me participating in a game jam instead of just working within the time constraints of one like I did here. So subscribe if that sounds interesting to you. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.